I want to just start with an apology. I'm sure you all remember a year ago, right? A year ago, and I didn't quite finish the topic of that particular shiur. I was reached the discussion about Lag BaOmer, and I promised you that Bli Neder I would get back to it. So here we are, a year later, and ready to do it. That's not the apology. I guess I should have apologized last year for not finishing the material. But I was planning on talking about the Lag BaOmer piece in any event when I was thinking about the two shiurim this week and next week. So the idea was to talk about things in the Omer that you don't count on, right? I'm sorry, right? You can count on bad jokes all the time, right? You know, it's like I tell my kids, you know, that when you take dad jokes and rabbi jokes, it becomes exponentially bad. But in any event, so the original plan, and so here as a Bli Neder, something for the future. The original plan was to take days in the Omer that are not really part of the Omer as such. Lag BaOmer is one of them, and the other is, which is tomorrow, excuse me, Pesach Sheni, and to discuss those dates. That was the plan. Fortunately, I've had a health issue in my family, which was had some complications, and that didn't allow me to really deal with to prepare the Daf Makorot that I wanted to do for the Pesach Sheni part. So I'm going to be going back to things that we've spoken about in the past, and then talking also about Lag BaOmer. So since judging by the faces, you didn't remember that I missed Lag BaOmer last year. So you might not remember the other things I spoke about either, so that's okay. So anyway, so it'll be chazar for those people who do remember, and then a deeper chazar for those who don't. So the whole year. What? We've been doing this the whole year. Okay, so here we go. But I will Bli Neder, very much want to get to the Lag BaOmer piece, which is the second part here, but we'll get to it. But so just to discuss, here we have the Omer, have a bit of a scratchy beard. And the various minhagim of the Omer. Where are they coming from? How are they developing? And part of that is what happens with Lag BaOmer as well, in terms of it being this particular day. So let's just start from the beginning. Here, this week's Parsha, in the middle of the Parshat HaMoadot, in Parshat Moadim, in Parshat Emor. The Rabbi of the Parsha, Usvartem lachem mimocharat haShabbat miyom aviachem et Omer hatnufa sheva Shabbatot timot tiyena ad mimocharat haShabbat hashvi'it tisperu 50 yom v'yikravtem mincha chadasha l'Hashem. So the psukim that we're familiar with, that you should count from the morning after the Shabbat, and that was a machloket between the Tzedukim and the Prushim as to what is that Shabbat that we're referring to. We're all familiar with the Prushi understanding, which is what is the Misoran, what's been accepted lahalacha, that it's the first day of Pesach. Their position was that it was the Shabbat, actual Shabbat following Pesach. But be that as it may, the major conflict in the end of Bayit Sheni on this regard. However, you bring the Omer on the second day of Pesach, and then you count the 7 full weeks, and spoiler alert, that's what I'm going to be speaking about next week in terms of how full do those weeks have to be. Can you make an early Shavuot? And that is until you reach the 7th week, Bacharat HaShabbat, 7 weeks later, 50 days, how that exactly works. Okay, v'kraftem mincha chadasha l'Hashem, and then you bring this second mincha, this new mincha, which the Torah talks about on Shavuot. In other words, the bracketing of the Omer is bracketed with these two korbanot of the Korban HaOmer, the first barley, because barley ripens faster than, and is planted earlier and ripens faster than wheat. And so that's the Korban that brings in the harvest season at Pesach time, and then the Korban at the end of the season. And if you drive around now, you'll see in different locales in Israel, some of the wheat fields have not yet been harvested, and some of the wheat fields have already been harvested, depending on exactly how warm it is in those areas. And so Shavuot, the harvest has already happened in terms of the wheat, and the korban reflects it. It's not a korban of barley the way it was at Pesach time, but it's a korban of bread which has been prepared with the new wheat harvest. So this is how the Torah presents the Omer. Now, jumping forward some 3,000 years, and you come to the Shulchan Aruch, and the Shulchan Aruch says the following, and I just want to put it into, I'm going to read it quickly, because I just want to get a sense of how the minhagim have developed, and then we're going to go back and sort of peel the layers of the onion to try to understand how they developed. So, but here is the nohagim, the first source here, nohagim shelo lisa isha ben Pesach la'atzeret ad lag la'omer. Right, so you don't marry between Pesach and Shavuot until Lag LaOmer. I'm not going to talk about the fact that he calls it LaOmer and not BaOmer. That's perhaps another discussion. Mipnei sheba'oto zman metu talmidei Rabbi Akiva. This is the time of the Rabbi. But just to note, the formulation is already strange. In other words, he didn't say simply Noagim shelo lisa isha ben Pesach Lag BaOmer. Right? It's ben Pesach la'atzeret, between Pesach and Shavuot, until Lag BaOmer. Right? It's a kind of a backwards way of saying it, but he explains what's the rationale, but that many of us are familiar with. This is the period of time that the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva passed away. So you can have engagements, but not marriages. Nami, and a marriage itself, mi shekafats v'kanas ein onshin oto. Okay, if somebody decides to get a better price on the hall, right? Because after all, there aren't anybody else getting married, and they get married during the Omer period, so we don't punish them in any way. Says the Rama, miu milag ba'omer. This is just the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim. The Sfaradim, it's la, and the Ashkenazim is ba. Again, I'm not going to talk about it because otherwise I won't reach the lag ba'omer discussion. Miu lag ba'omer ve'elach hakol shari. But from lag ba'omer and on, the Rama says, according to this approach, and we'll see the Rama's approach in a moment, which is a little bit different, everything is permissible. The Shulchan Aruch continues, bet, noagim shelo listaper ad lag la'omer, shomrim az pasku lamut. So the custom is not to take haircuts until Lag BaOmer, because they say that's when they ended, they no longer, they ceased to die. He didn't say that in the first time. It's like, the language here is also, why did he mention that fact in the first seif? Ve'ein lihistaper ad yom lamed dalid baboker. So the Sfardim, and following the Shulchan Aruch, that they don't take haircuts on Lag BaOmer itself. They wait till the 34th. Ela im ken chal yom lag erev Shabbat, unless the 33rd day falls on Friday and the 34th is on Shabbat. Sha'az mistaprin bo b'tnei kvod Shabbat, and then you can have it on the 34th. Says the Rama, uv'medinot elu, in the Ashkenazic world, ein nohagin kidvarav. So our minhag is not this way. Elam mistaprin biyom lag, but rather we already have our haircuts on Lag BaOmer proper. Umarbim bo k'tzat simcha, something new. Rama said, Shulchan Aruch didn't mention this at all. Because if you think about it, like, if the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva are dying, and they stop. So that's not exactly a reason for simcha. I mean, it might be a reason for a sigh of relief, but not more than that, right? So why suddenly do we have simcha? Ve'en omrim bo tachanun. And we don't say tachanun on this day either. What? That's the simcha, right? So I guess it's sort of a, I guess it's somewhat circular, isn't it? Ve'en lihistaper ad 33 ba'atzmo v'lo miba'erev. But even according to this, you shouldn't jump the gun and the night of Lag BaOmer take a haircut. Miu imchal biyom rishon nogin lihistaper biyom vav l'chvod Shabbat. In other words, so you can, when Lag BaOmer falls out on a Sunday, right, this year it's a Tuesday, but on a Sunday, so then you can jump the gun and already get a haircut on the 31st. However, if you're dealing with somebody who's dealing with a brit, the Baal Brit is refers to the sandak. So because the custom was, and I guess still is in many instances, for the sandak to pay for the brit. That's why he was called the Baal Brit, right? Right? You know, the grandparents, the supporting actors. Yes.
In question, Minhag Eretz Yisrael. Is there such a thing, or do we just stick by the strict Ashkenaz or Sfarad?
But hopefully get to it. So, but just and right now, I'm just trying to lay out sort of like a, just so people can have a little bit of a, I guess, chazar for the halachot, but also to have a framework to work with. But just noticing how things. But we'll get to bli neder, and if I don't, remind me. So yesh nohagim. So gimel yesh nohagim listaper berosh chodesh iyar v'totu biyadam. So this was actually a pretty well established minhag. It's mentioned by contemporaries of the Shulchan Aruch in his area, the Radbaz, etc. In other words, in the Sephardic world, there was an established minhag to take haircuts on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and the Shulchan Aruch doesn't like it at all. That's why he says ta'ut, because it's a mistake. The minhag is there, but it's just a mistake. And then says the Ramah, mihu, however. Until now, we've been talking about, if you will, the minhag of the Sfaradim with the minor variations in terms of what you do on Lag BaOmer, the 34th of the Omer, etc. Now the Ramah introduces the Ashkenazic minhag. Miu b'harbei mekomot nohagim listaper ad Rosh Chodesh Iyar. So in many places the minhag is until Rosh Chodesh Iyar. V'otem le'istapru miLag BaOmer ve'elach. So those people who've been taking haircuts until the 33rd, until Rosh Chodesh, should not take a haircut from Lag BaOmer on. Even though, even for them, the 33rd, right, again, has significance in of itself. I have to ask why. And those people who have the first minhag, and finish their avelut, or we'll call avelut in quote, air quotes, at Lag BaOmer, so they shouldn't take a haircut earlier, sort of taking, trying to benefit from both sides. Okay, in other words, so basically, this is okay, and until a slightly later period in time where communities are thrust together, and that is a discussion which I won't get into now. How do you handle this in particular when you have different people, different minhagim? I'll just mention the question with regard to minhag Eretz Yisrael. This particular year, because of all of the issues that have been because of the war and all the weddings that were canceled in Adar and the beginning of Nisan because of the situation. The Rabbanut Rashit allowed, even though normally speaking, the primary position of the Rabbanut Rashit is for there not to be weddings between Pesach and Lag BaOmer, so they allowed for weddings to take place. And then the question that comes up, or came up, right? People, if you're keeping one minhag, can you take a haircut in order to go to the wedding? If you're a brother-in-law or something along those lines, how can you dance at the wedding? So this was mentioned that Rav Moshe already has a tshuva, because in New York all these minhagim were mixed together. He basically said you can celebrate at other people's smachot. Right? Bottom line. Right, you can do that. He doesn't talk about haircuts though. He's an assumption that you're not going to take a haircut. With regard to, but okay, that's not the topic of this year. Yeah.
This year in the States, the position was that since Rosh Chodesh Iyar was an Erev Shabbat, then you were specifically allowed to take haircuts and shave.
That is correct. That's already a shita of that's brought in the Magen Avraham in the Mishnah Berurah, that all of the minhagim allow for you on when Rosh Chodesh falls on Shabbat lechatchila to take a haircut. I shouldn't say all the minhagim, because there are those who argue with that, right? But it is certainly it is one of those heterim which many people aren't aware of, and you could see it. People who would follow the Mishnah Berurah, through hell and high water, but they didn't shave. In any event, it's all minhag. All minhag. Okay, so let's talk about how these minhagim develop. So there's a Gemara which is oftentimes quoted. It is it's the context. It's a tangent in the Gemara itself, because the Gemara is discussing something with regard to how do you move forward in life? Tanya Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Nasa Adam Isha biyalduto, Isha biskunoto. Hayulo banim biyalduto, yulo banim biskunoto. Shenemar baboker zarat zarecho la'erev al tanach yadecha ke'encha yodea eze yichshar hazeh ozeh v'im shnehem ke'echad tovish. It's basically what the base of the Gemara is, this idea that Rabbi Yoshua says that basically never take your foot off the gas pedal. Well, you always should be trying to be as productive as possible for as long as possible, because when you rest on your laurels, you don't know what will come from those earlier successes. And so if God forbid a person is widowed, they should remarry, and if a person, they should have the children for as late as possible, etc., in order to be able to be as fruitful in all of the meanings of the word as possible and as successful as possible. That's the idea that Rabbi Yoshua is saying. And in that context, the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Lamad Torah biyalduto, Yilmad Torah b'ziknuto. So, following the words of his Rabbi Yoshua is one of Rabbi Akiva's Rabbi. So, similarly, in terms of your learning, so continue to try to be as productive intellectually as possible. Hayulo talmidim biyalduto, yulo talmidim b'ziknuto. Similarly, don't retire if you are in the world of chinuch. Don't retire early. Try to create as many students as possible. Shenemar uses the same pasuk, and then in that context, the Gemara says, Amru Shneim Asar Elef Zugim Talmidim Hayu Lo Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva was not speaking theoretically. Rabbi Akiva had his 24,000, 12,000 pairs of students. Migvat ad Antiparas throughout the country. V'chulan meitu beperek echad mipnei shelo nahagu kavod zelazeh. And they all died in a short period of time, and because they did not give proper respect to one another. Perhaps that's why they talk about the chavrutot as opposed to just simply saying 24,000. V'haya ha'olam shamem, and the world was desolate. Ad sheba Rabbi Akiva etz rabotenu shebidara mushna elahem. And so Rabbi Akiva came and taught his 5 Talmidim, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Vehem emidu Torah u'tasha'a. In other words, Rabbi Akiva could have looked at that moment of true disaster, true tragedy, saying his life work has literally gone to the grave, and given up. Instead, he went and took those 5 students and taught them, and they are the backbone of our Masorah to this day, right? So those 5 students are the key students, and so Rabbi Akiva, in effect, was living what he had practiced, what he had preached. Tana Kula Metu, and now going back to that, there is a later Tanaitic, that's the original source, and then comes a later Tanaitic layer, which the Gemara introduces with that word Tana. That's what that word Tana always means in the Gemara, a Tanaitic perush to what was already said. Kulam Metu mi Pesach va'ad Atzeret, that what was that period of time? From Pesach until Shavuot. Amar Rav Chama bar Abba v'Item Rabbi Chia bar Abba and Kulam Metu mita Ra'ah. Okay, so then we'll forget about the way that they passed away at the moment. So this is the source. Now notice there's no mention of Lag BaOmer here. Right? And it's also a later, later tradition that the period of time that they died was this period of time, and they
morning.
Right. No mention of mourning. None of that is there in the Gemara. Absolutely not. No mention of Lag BaOmer is having significance. Now it does mention something which comes up in the later period of time, that the Gemara says they died from a disease, askara, so etc. But there are those who want to argue, and this has become introduced in rabbinic sources as well, even though it was introduced by a maskil. In the Rav Nachman Kruchmal, who wanted to claim that the students, the 24,000 students, died as soldiers in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and that might also be indicative, even though the Gemara doesn't bring the mourning period in. That's why that becomes a bit more of a mourning period, and that if that's the case. So then it talks about then the tradition of Shalom Nahagu Kavod Zelazeh wasn't simply a question of not giving proper kavod in the base medrash, but a question of perhaps, and this is something that we should take to heart again, whether it's true or I'll put it this way, whether it's historically accurate or not, there is truth to it, right? That the internal divisions, that's the Nahagu Kavod Zelazeh. So that leads to defeat, God forbid, on the battlefield as well. So that is if you will, the background. Now, again, there's no mention of Avelut. There's no mention of Lag BaOmer. We move forward from the time of from the Gemara to a tshuva of the Goanim. I don't know if it's been dated, so we'll say. And so it's not totally clear, but it's sometime in the end of the first millennium, and we have the following question: Shaltem lama ein mekachim ve'ein kotzin ben Pesach la'atzeret. This is a question of the Gaonim. There is this minhag of people not getting married from Pesach until Shavuot. Im machmat isur olav. The minhag is there, and people are asking the Gaonim exactly what's the background for this? Why do we have this minhag, or what? And what is the level of it? So in machmat isur, right? It could be right that people are saying it's a real isur. It's along the lines of, because let's say during Chol HaMoed, for example, so it's usher to get married on Ein Marvin Simcha B'Simcha. So is this new minhag, right? We don't know how long it's been going on for. How is this of a similar halachic level? Havei Yodin. So this is the answer. Shalom mishum isurhu, ela mishum minhag avelut. Understand that this is not an isur; it's a minhag based on avelut. Shekach amru chachamim. And the Gaon connects it to the Gemara that we just read, that this is the period of time that the students of Rabbi Akiva passed away. Three lines from the bottom. Right, so this minhag, at least according to the Gaonim, goes back to the time of Rabbi Akiva, right, till roughly we'll say the middle of the 2nd century of the Common Era. Umisha kafatz v'kanas einanu konsinota. However, if somebody goes and gets married, so there is no penalty for that. Lo onesh, no presumably financial penalty. The lo malkot, and no corporal penalty. Don't put him in stocks or anything along those lines. No lashes. Aval im bal lishol lechatchila ein morim lo lichnos. ולעניין קידושין, מי שרצה לקדש בין פסח לעצרת מקדש, לפי שאין עיקר שמחה אלא בחופה. So the minhag here is to not to actually to have the nisuin, to have the chuppah, but at that period of time they were still separating the kiddushin from the chuppah. So you could have the engagement because that's not the real simcha, but so it's a weak, if you will, minhag, right? To not have it, it's something that we tell people not to do. We don't penalize anyone who decides to go ahead and do it. And also, no mention of Lag BaOmer.
Are they trying to say here that it came up from the people, or that it just wasn't documented?
Not clear. He's just saying that this is a minhag that can be dated back, or going back to it, and this is the rationale for it. Whether it started with the people, whether it was a rabbinical, it could very well be that the fact that he's making a point not to penalize those people who are getting married, that it is a grassroots type of minhag, but I can't say that with any surety. So now just to understand that there are other minhagim that are going on at the same time, given for the same reason, which have not carried through. So, for example, the Gaonim also say the following: Rabbeinu Hai b'tshuva, number 5. Ma shenahagu shelo la'asot melacha mipesach v'ad atzeret mishkiat hachama v'ad shacharit. There was a minhag not to engage in melacha, not to engage in work from at night during the time of the Sfira to Omer, and it's because of these same Talmidim Rabbi Akiva who died, and they died after dark, and they were buried after dark, and as a result, people weren't able to go about their normal routines, and so that's where the minhag came from, right? So none of you, right? Till I saw that source, I had never heard of that minhag before, right? But that was a minhag in the time of the Gaonim, right? And so again, there are all sorts of things that are going on. The Shulchan Aruch does bring it, by the way, not the next halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, but not with regard to all people, but only with regard to nahagu hanashim shelo la'asot melacha mipesach v'ad atzeret, that women don't do melacha. Right? How that jumped, I'm not 100% sure, other than to say that perhaps Rosh Chodesh, for example, there's minhag with regard to specifically with women not doing melacha as well. There is a minhag that the Yerushalmi brings, nothing to do with it. So the Yerushalmi talks about how women wouldn't do melacha until their husbands came home from shul and made havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. Right? So I always said that was sort of like my tefillah on the only time I know there's a direct correlation between my kavana and my tefillot being answered is on Motzei Shabbat. The longer I pray Mariv, the less there is for me to do when I get home. But apparently the Yerushalmi was also aware of that. So they said the minhag were not to start cleaning up until after their husbands came home. Be that as it may, this period of time has it. Okay, so has these minhagim, and is it being attributed post facto? Or is this indeed the rationale that started the ball rolling? It's hard to tell, right? But it is an old minhag going back, and again, no Lag BaOmer in any of this. Lag BaOmer only pops up in the period of the Rishonim, and here this is first of all, before we get to Lag BaOmer, just one mention the Ritzkiat. So this is an early Sephardic source. He says the following: Minag b'chol Yisrael shelo lisa isha. It's already that's the key words that but he stresses the below mishum isur. He's clearly working off of this Gaonim, the Shuva of the Gaonim, but a couple of hundred years later, more than a couple, about 300, 400 years later, at this point, it has become, at least in the Sephardic world, right, in the Islamic world, it's become a universal minhag. B'chol ha'olam. Right? It's not people asking, where did this minhag pop up from? But rather it's a well entrenched minhag at that point. When it comes to as we now go to the 12th century, the end of the 1100s, we have a source not in the Muslim world, but in the not quite Ashkenazic world, in Provence, in southern France. And he says the following: the Ach minhag b'Tzarfat u'b'Provancia lichnos milag la'omer ve'elach. The lines that I skipped, he mentioned the minhag not to get married in the entire Omer period, and he says now in our areas, in France and in northern France and in southern France, so we get married from Lag BaOmer on. V'shamati b'shem Rabbeinu Rav Zrachia Migrona shematzah katuv b'sefer Yashan haba misfarad. Where did this come from? And so he says the source is that I heard from Rav Zrachia of Gron, that's the Baal HaMor, that he found written in an old book that came from Spain. Now he's in Spain, but he's in what we call Spain. He's in Girona, which is right outside of Barcelona. Okay, so in that area, but this is when there's still this is during the period of the Reconquista. This is when the different areas of the Iberian Peninsula are different jurisdictions. So when he's talking about Sfarad, he's talking about Andalusia. So he is in the Christian areas, and he's saying that there's this book that came from Sfarad, Shemetu mi Pesach va'ad pros ha'atzeret, until the half of the Atzeret, pros. Umay pursa palga. What is that? The word pros atzeret. A new word has been introduced in the text. This word pros, what does that word mean? Right, from like a pusat lechem, something is sliced, so it's a half. And the idea being that the half is not from Pesach to Atzeret, but from Rosh Chodesh to Shavuot. So it becomes my porsa palga kedash sholim bilchot Pesach kodem Pesach 30 yom palga 15 yom kodem ha'atzeret. In other words, you take a half period of a month, which is 15 days, count back from Atzeret, and you get to Lag LaOmer. Okay, that was the meaning that on the 34th is already okay, 33rd. So that's the. So where did that come from? I mean, it's found in this ancient book, but there's no explanation that's given. We have to wait, at least in terms of the written record, another 100 years to get a little explanation for this. And this is in the Meiri in Provence, and he says, "V'kabbalah biyad ha'gaonim shebiyom lag ba'omer paska hamita v'noagim mitoch kach shelo litanot bo v'kach noagim mitoch kach shelo lisa isha mipesach adot ozman." In other words, that this again, where this exactly how it developed is not totally clear. But in terms of this minhag, in other words, there's a rolling back, and it's not that it's becoming more chamor, it's becoming more mekel. This additional 15 days of where the avelut stops becomes a kabbalah biyad ha'gaonim. Not mentioned in the Gemara, not even mentioned in the original Gaonic sources, but somewhere it becomes introduced, and this becomes the idea that the end of the death was on Lag BaOmer, and so as a result, from that point on, which is pros, taking a 15-day period, that is the when you can get it. Now you can understand, by the way, just to the Shulchan Aruch, when I asked earlier, why is he using that curious formulation? So he's working off of the existing sources. Existing sources, he's not trying just to write a simple guide to halakha. He's working off of existing sources, and since the existing sources started with Pesach HaTzeret, and then Pesach HaTzeret becomes Ad Pros HaTzeret, becomes Lag BaOmer, so he says the minhag is not to get married until be Pesach HaTzeret, and from Lag BaOmer on, so then you can get married. Well, just to explain how that seems to develop. Now
He's saying that the minhag of Lag BaOmer started in the period of the Geonim, or it started.
Let's put it this way: we have no idea. Okay, that's the simplest answer. Is we really don't know, but it sounds as though the minhag starts in we'll say in France, and maybe throw in the area right on the other side of the Pyrenees in Barcelona, in that area, that the sometime in the Rishonim period, and they base it on what they claim to have had a misorah from the Geonim. That's what it sounds like. What about notice? No, haircuts have not been mentioned here. Okay, just to. Right, that's a different source. Then that's here the Beit Yosef. That's the Shulchan Aruch's longer work, in which the Shulchan Aruch is a digest of. So the Masha Katav, he's referring to the tour. The Beit Yosef is a commentary on the tour. The tour is a work of the of Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher in the end of the 13th. The end of the 14th century, the end of the 13th, beginning of the 14th century in Spain, in Toledo. He's was born in Germany, and he, together with his father, the Rush, moves from Germany to and arrives in Toledo, which is in central Spain, in Castile. And so this is the where he says that there are those people who don't take haircuts. Where does that come from? So the Beit Yosef says what he writes with regard to that. So he quotes a somewhat obscure source, but it was a contemporary of the tour in Toledo, Rabbeinu Yehoshua ibn Shuaib, who was not known for his halachic works, but more for his liturgical works and his. I think he was also a Kabbalist. But he wrote Bidrashat Yom Rishon Shel Pesach. In his drashot, he has a collection of drashot, not halachic work, but they're drashot that he would give in the various shuls. The Chein Minhag Pashut Beinenu. This is where that comes from, right? And he explains. The Shamati, just to go where it's underlined, Sheyesh b'midrash shemetu mi Pesach ad prot ha'atzeret v'hu tedvav yom kodem ha'atzeret she'omram. In other words, someone adds, if you will, that along the same time that Lag BaOmer is becoming a demarcation date, in the Omer that says, well, if it's based on Avelut, so then we have other minhagim of Avelut. And one of those minhagim of Avelut is not to take haircuts. So we should. This also should be, if you will, thrown into the mix. Right? So that's the, if you will, what seems to be the development. Now this is with regard to, if we were to stop here, right? So then we would say the following: basically, we have this minhag that seems to develop sometime in the mid centuries of the first millennium in Babel, not to get married. it's attributed to this idea of it being a period of time of the death of the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. A little bit later, a tradition arises that they only died for the first 33 days or so, and so the Avelut finishes at Lag BaOmer. There's no significance to Lag BaOmer other than that's the end. And now you can understand why. When can you start getting married? On the 34th. No, there's no significance to Lag BaOmer per se. It just happens to be the last day, and then you have the about the same time that Lag BaOmer is gaining traction. So then you also have the minhag developing in certain circles in Spain, right? In the different circles, because the other circles were in Aragon and in northern Spain and in southern France. This is in central Spain at that time for them not to have not to have haircuts, but they use the same period of time. Yeah.
For this term of Avelut, you God forbid die a parent, it's two things: not get married and not get a haircut.
Right.
Right. It's not. You can't. The trouble today is we tend to mix this up with the 9 days.
Correct.
So I can't buy something new.
Correct. Right. So all of that.
At this point.
Correct. So that's where we would have. Okay. Now we mentioned that the Ramah said that minhagim amongst the Ashkenazim is to start our Avelut around but on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and to continue it until Shavuot. Okay, and not to mix the two minhagim. Where did that come from? Right? There's no mention of anything in the second half. If anything, that's the whole thing. Why? This is because of we'll say, I won't say greater tragedy or lesser tragedy, but certainly a more timely and poignant tragedy that it's occurring to the Ashkenazi communities exactly at this time, this period of time, as the Lag BaOmer is being introduced a little bit further south, and that is the history of the Crusades, and specifically the history of the First Crusade in 1096. And I'm not going to read through it, but you can see that the dates of, I just took from the Encyclopedia Judaica to give you a sense that all of the major cities that were destroyed in the Rhineland in the First Crusade, which left an indelible mark on Ashkenazic Jewry, perhaps even to this very day. So it occurs from Rosh Chodesh Iyar until Shavuot, right? The march of the Crusaders through Germany and on their way to redeem the Holy Land and take it from the Muslims. So they killed the Jews along the way, and you can see that I just put in bold the different dates: the 8th of Iyar, the 23rd of Iyar, the 3rd of Sivan, the 6th of Sivan, etc. So this becomes a period of real mourning. And not saying that I'm having any reason why we shouldn't remember. It's the difference, let's say, for us. I won't say lahavdil. When we talk about the Shoah, right? So it's a very different kind of discussion than if, let's say, I'm talking about the Chelminsky massacres of 1648, 1649, right? So which, for the Jews living in the 17th, 18th centuries, were much more poignant, right, for those Jews in Poland and the like, than the Crusades were. But for medieval Ashkenazic Jewry, the great tragedy was the tragedy of the Crusade, and this eclipses any discussion of what happened to Rabbi Akiva and his Talmidim. And so the period of mourning that has to be focused on is the period of mourning of the Crusades, and we have this in terms of some records as well. That you have, for example, let's say, and let's just take the third source number 13 here. the 14th century work of Minhagim. Minhag tov shelo listaper v'shelo lechanech ksut v'shum davar chadash ulitaneg b'mirchatz lasot tzipornav me'acharei ha'pesach ad hatzerech l'chvod ha'chasidim ha'tmimim ha'yisharim shemasru atzmam al kedushat Hashem. So, and this is getting to what Jack was saying earlier, where does the, if you will, other minhagim of Avelut come from? Right? And this is at the same time, again, the exact same time that where the Crusades weren't as major of a factor, but they're also introducing not taking haircuts at that as part of Omer. Right? But here you have the minhagim of those communities, the Ashkenazi communities, that are saying this is a period of mourning where we will treat it as very similar to the Yud Bet Chodesh of Aveilut that we're familiar with when a parent passes away. This is also, just an aside in terms of the other minhagim, in terms of Avarachamim. Right, so the tefillah of Avarachamim that we say between Kriyat Torah and Musaf on every Shabbat, so that was written for the martyrs of the First Crusade, and the original minhag was that they said it every Shabbat. And then, as we are familiar with, the minhag becomes that you don't say it when there's Rosh Chodesh. You don't say it for let's say during the Arba Parshiot, etc. When you're bench Rosh Chodesh, etc. However, having said that, and this is a source. I'm not going to read number 12 because I do want to get to Lag BaOmer. You don't say it. It was introduced especially in the Shabbatot, and so the old joke is that the minhag is to argue about it. But during the period of time, even if Rosh Chodesh Iyar, this like 2 weeks ago when Rosh Chodesh Iyar was on Shabbat, right? So the predominant minhag is to say Av Harachamim, because this is the period of time when they were being slaughtered. And so, therefore, you say Av Harachamim, even though it's Rosh Chodesh itself, and this is you can read number 14 yourself. That's where this why we do that on Varchin Chodesh Iyar v'Sivan v'Av Omrim Afilu K'sheish Brit Milah Chatan, etc. In other words, this is the period of time. So now you have this period of mourning. How does it happens to be during Sfirat Omer. So there is this sense, though, of it still needs to mesh with the original minhagim. So you have the Maharil, who's in the end of the 14th, beginning of the 15th century, and a very influential both posek and chronicling minhagim of Ashkenaz, and he says the following: Lag BaOmer Lo'olam hu Yudchet Bi'ar u'v'shacharit ein omrim tchina b'magensia v'mersia omrim tchina b'Lag BaOmer. In other words, in the Rhine communities, Lag BaOmer received no dispensation because that's exactly where the crusade took place. But he talks about Lag BaOmer as being having already some simcha. Mikom makom osin biyom Lag BaOmer yom simcha mishum demeitu rak hayamim sheomrim behen tchina. So this is a new idea. In other words, how do you get how do you mesh these two different ideas? So he said that a new Masorah. The Masorah was that they died. Remember, if they died from some kind of disease, and there's this, there is a form of hashgacha that's involved with it. So they only passed away. Rak hayamim she'omrim behen tchina. They only died on the days in the Sfira when you would say Tachanun. It was when the days of mourning. So b'shiva shavuot ha'omer v'chol yom she'ein omrim tchina lo meitu. Right? The days that you did it, they don't say Tachanun because there is some already inherent simcha in those days. So they didn't die on those days. So if you take those days, hashta, and now, dal min hamemtet yom shel sfira. You're starting with 49 days of sfira. Shiva yemei achag. So take away 7 days of Pesach. Shlosha yamim dechal ben Rosh Chodesh, behen Rosh Chodesh. 3 days of Rosh Chodesh. We're up to 10. Okay? Shnayim liyar bechad l'sivan. B'sheva Shabbatot. And 7 Shabbatot that are in there. Parshu lehed lamid bet. So now you have 32. It sounds as though he did say Tachnun on Nisan there. Okay? But any of that, be that as it may, so that leaves you 32 days. Dimtzad lo meitu rak lamid bet yamim, lachen keshakalu otam lamid bet yamim shemeitu osim lemacharatan simcha lezecher. Right? In other words, so that's why we'll now take the 33rd day, and because you only had really 32 days of actual death. And the 33rd day, this is different than the Masorah of the Gaonim, and not the 33 days. But the idea is that you have 30. Now, if you, by the way, if you take the from Rosh Chodesh until Shavuot, taking away Shloshet Yemei Hagbala, 33 days, right? So, in other words, playing with the numbers, right? We keep this minhag of this Masorah of 33, even though the if you will, the impetus for the Avelut has changed. It's no longer maybe we'll give lip service or we'll mention, honorable mention to Rabbi Akiva and his students, but the primary reason within the Ashkenazi community for the mourning is the period of mourning for the Crusades. Yeah.
I mentioned it last year, but the Shabbat during Pesach overlaps the 7 Shabbat and the 7 days of
That's true, right? You got it. That's good. You got it. Okay. By the way, using this math, there is a minhag which is known as the third minhag for Avel, that you go back to the original minhag of treating Sfira in its entirety and saying you're still stuck with the 33 days because we don't mourn on Pesach itself, and we don't mourn on the on Rosh Chodesh, and we don't mourn on the Shlosh Yemei, etc. So then you get the idea. Okay. Lag BaOmer. So already there's a mention of a little simcha because this was the idea is that the 33rd day of the Omer has no significance because on the 34th, 35th day, people are still dying, right? According to the Maharil, they died throughout the entire period unless it was a Shabbat, right? So why Lag BaOmer? So Lag BaOmer becomes significant because of the number 33, not because anything happened on that day. The simcha that he's saying, the little bit of simcha is that there is something on that it was only 32 days of punishment and not 33 days. So we take a day which is symbolically the day of 33 and we treat it as a little Yom Tov. And that's why we can do this, right? Even though it's in the middle of the period of mourning that we're having for the Crusades. When the Crusades start on Rosh Chodesh Iyar, and we're going to go all the way till Shavuot. Here's Yudchet Iyar, smack in the middle, but it's day 33, right? We've been counting. It's Lag BaOmer. We count this day. It has this significance. We need a little bit of a breather. Okay? So this is if you will, the kernel of where Lag BaOmer gets significance as opposed to just being the last day when they died and tomorrow we can get a haircut. Right, but rather it's now the day 33 has reached a significance. Now this will the same drasha of Rabbi Yoshua ibn Sha'ub, number 18 here, right? That same period he says, "Umashin hagu rov ha'adam lahagdil safam ad lag ba'omer lo matzinu bo inyan." Right, and he also said we didn't find any earlier idea of not shaving, and then he also does the math, and he also gets to the excuse me, pages here. Right there. So he also is this the reason why I brought it here is because what the Maharil is a little bit later. So the math that's been involved in terms of getting to the 33 is already found its way into Sephardic minhagim as well. We're going to jump now 500 years, and we're now in the beginning of the 19th century. And here suddenly there's the Chassam Sofer at Moshe Sofer of Pressburg. So he already mentions a bidhag. He says the following: Annam yadate ki shamati achshav. So he's in Central Europe, and he's saying, I've now received word of the following: Achshav achshir dorim merchak yavo yidroshu. So word from afar comes. Be'ira Kodesh Tzfat. That is now in Tzfat, not Meron. In Tzfat, Biyom Lamed Gimel Ba'omer Behilula de Rashbiza. That there is this idea of this celebration of the Yortzeit of Rashbi, Rashbi Bar Yochai. V'im ki kol chavanatam l'shem shamayim. Scharam rav b'li safek. Since they're doing this l'shem shamayim, of course they'll be rewarded. Aval mitam ze ba'atzmo hayiti adi min haprushim. But I have reservations, he says, of this whole idea. Sha'osim yom tov b'yom shena'aseh lahem nes. We make a yom tov on a day when a miracle happens, right? But to create a Yom Tov when no miracle happened, but if you read through all the Makorim that we just read, there's no Yom Tov here. It's just at the most you're going to get is that the day of 33 has some significance, and therefore we will allow people to get married, we'll allow people to get haircuts, but it's nothing to celebrate as such, right? The Vitama Gufa Lo Yadana, and we don't know what the rationale is. I mean, where does this come from? So you have this minhag Hilula de Rashbi, very nice, right? You're doing it l'shem shamayim, but it's not real, right? There's no reason to be going about this. And there are others who I could have also quoted also from the same period of time. This is becoming, and so he says, where do I have a source? B'sidur harav Yabetz katav al pi nistarim kain hayot haradat haman biyom lamed gimel ba'omer v'ru'uya lasot l'zeh zecher tov achu neged shas. In other words, there are those who want to say that there's when did the man start falling? The first year in the Midbar, that was on Lag BaOmer, and this is where you get the minhag from. But this is not significant enough to justify the minhag, he says. Right? No, it's not coming now. You're more than welcome. I recommend highly that particular article on the mysterious origins of Rashbi's Yortzeit, in the Sfarim blog, and it's by all means I took some. I'm going to now take the second on the back page here, the original text, because this is important. This is going back to the time of the Ari. So we're talking about in the 16th century. Right? There is a clear minhag to treat the Lag BaOmer as a more joyous day than we've said before. B'inyan elu alchim al kivrei Rashbi ubino Rebbe Eliezer b'Meiron lamed gimel BaOmer ani ra'iti lemori zatzal. So this is written by Rav Chaim Vital, or attributed to Rav Chaim Vital, speaking of the Ari. Shmona shanim shahalach sham im ishto v'nei beito shlosha yamim. So he would go 8 years running. He went with his family to Meron from Tzfat, it's not that far. Gam he'id Rav Avraham Alevi ki hu haya noheg lomar tamid nachem בברכת חשבון תשובון, כשסיים התפילה, אמר למורי ז"ל משם רשב"י עליו השלום הקבור שם, אמור לאיש הזה למה הוא אומר נחם ביום שמחתי. In other words, this Rabbi Avram had a minhag as part of his mourning in general for the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Every day, what we say, Nachem on Tisha B'Av, he would add it into his tefillah. And he didn't stop saying it on Lag BaOmer. And the Arizal said to him, or passed on that he should be told, that the Rashum Bar Yochai is saying, why are you saying this on my day of joy? Ki gam Rashbi ayat mitalmidim Rabbi Akiva, v'hu samach b'Lag BaOmer, lachen hu yeh b'nechama b'karov. No, basically, he's saying, why is this day different? Because this, Rashum Bar Yochai was one of the 5 students who survived. And so he's saying this, they stopped dying on Lag BaOmer, and I'm here, I'm alive. And I was able to revive things. So this is a day of joy for me personally, Rabbi Rashbi. And so this person shouldn't be saying Nachem on this day. There's a tragic ending to this because V'chein haya ki lo yatsa chodesh ad shemet beno hagadol. This person buried a son, right, which was attributed to his saying Nachem on the day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's joy. A terrible story in itself, but the point is that it's a Yom Simcha. And why is it a Yom Simcha? Not because it's the day that he died, but because it's the day that he lived, in effect. That's where the Simcha. Now, where did that begin? Where did that idea begin from? Well, it's not at all clear. In other words, there's a Kabbalistic tradition, and it's already being quoted from the time of the Ari, that there is this notion that it's the day of the Simcha of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but it's not the Yortzeit. The Yortzeit comes from a printing mistake. Because the same Sefer, this pre-Eitz Chaim, which was a collection of, as I said, Rav Chaim Vital's recollections and the halachot of minhagim of the Ari, goes through different printings. So I just read the first edition. The second edition, which became the more popular edition, you can read there's some slight other variations in the text, but if you just go to the bottom line where it's underlined, it's not v'hatam shesamach, that he was happy, but rather tam shemet. In other words, that someone saw that chet in Rashi print, right? And in the next printing, they put it in the taf, right? Because it's very similar in terms of the print, and it becomes known as the Yortzeit of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, because all subsequent works that are referring back to what Rav Chaim Vital quoted in the name of the Ari work with the second edition. This was also the and all these sources I took from that article, by the way. So Rav Zevin, the author of Moedim B'Halacha and other works, so he was a Chabad Chassid, and not from Lubavitch, but from let's get the name of town. Biorskin, something along those lines. I know it's another center of Chabad Chassidut, but he had a very close relationship with the Rebbe, and in many ways. And so there's a letter that was written from the Rebbe to Rav Zevin after he published the work that he's most famous for, Moedim B'Halacha, where he has various essays on the different Yomim Tovim, and in that, so in Moedim B'Halacha, so he writes that he talks about the Minhagim, and he quotes this source of it being the Yortzeit of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, and the Lubavitch Rebbe wrote him the following. He says that, I got my hands on a copy of your book and I liked it very much, etc. And I noticed that you wrote this custom. However, he said, Yinei Yadua, in the second paragraph there, Ashaketa ze mukshahu min ha'nigla. Ki rashbihu me'achamisha talmidim shesamach Rabbi Akiva achar kach, etc. And he talks about how it gets into the pre-Eitz Chaim, that's Pei Ayin Chet, Shamu V'Sidur Arizal, etc. V'siyem v'ulai yesh ta'ut sefer. Ta'ut sefer b'pre-Eitz Chaim sham v'ma shekatav ki hu mate. כנזכר לאל, וצריך עיון בדפוס קרץ שבתי שם שנשמט זה, ואמת כן הוא אשר בפרי עץ חיים דפוס קרץ לא נמצא קטע הנ"ל. In other words, but he explains that why is it a day of simcha? Because again, it's the day that they didn't die and that they were able to move forward. So it's that there's no argument, let's say from the Mesorah, that Mesorah which develops later, right, doesn't have any roots in the Gemara, doesn't have roots in the Gaon, doesn't have roots in the Rishonim, doesn't have roots in the early Achronim. It has roots in Kabbalistic circles around Tzfat. That this becomes Lag BaOmer, which already has significance that we saw, is becoming a day of joy for Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So that it does have Kabbalistic roots, but the idea of it being the Yortzeit, well, that's just that's what happens when you don't proofread well enough.
And you're right, that this is a more authentic, Samach is a more authentic version?
Right, correct. That's the first version. So whether it's more authentic or not, that seems to be because it's the first. Yeah.
Well, this begs the question: does anyone know what Rashbi's actual site is? Yeah, okay.
What is it? No, that's that Mesorah goes also back to the time of the Ari. That is the grave site of the of Rashbi. No, we don't have it in Mesorah. We don't have Mesorah there. Okay. There's more to be added to it, but no. So, Be'ezrat Hashem, the original idea was to talk about Lag BaOmer, which is sort of the day that becomes super significant, as opposed to Pesach Sheni, which is the day that has become drained of its significance. But okay, Be'ezrat Hashem in the future.